Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Pragmatic Investor. My guest today is Mike Fay. He's a fellow essay contributor and the author behind the Heretic Speculator on Substack. Now, I decided to bring Mike on today because there's been a lot of interesting stuff going on in the market. Of course, we had the issues with NVIDIA and Coreweave a few weeks ago. We had that big spike in the 2 year Treasury just a few days ago. So I wanted to bring Mike on the show to give us his perspective on what's happening and give us his kind of alternative view on some of the events. So, today we pretty much discuss some of the investment conspiracy theories that have been arising in the last few weeks. We had a great conversation about NVIDIA and Coreweave, about whether the markets are being propped up ahead of the election. We also talked about the BRICS and the gold-backed currency, how much gold China has, how much Bitcoin China has, and talked a lot about the dollar and its outlook in the world as a reserve currency. And as always, we ended with some actionable advice. If the economy is nearing collapse, how do we prepare for that? What kind of assets can we invest in today to protect our wealth tomorrow? I really enjoyed this conversation with Mike. It's the third time he's been on the show, and I just really enjoy getting his take on everything. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend you check out his Substack, The Heretic Speculator. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. As always, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. All right, Mike, welcome back to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, James, pleasure. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, I don't know if this would be a fair assessment, but I was looking at everything that was happening with NVIDIA and putting my tinfoil hat on, and I kind of thought, who knows a little bit about conspiracies and kind of alternative thinking, and you came to mind, Mike. I don't know if you'd feel that's a fair characterization.
Listen, you can't have a Substack publication called Heretic Speculator and not expect to be looked at as maybe the guy who's a little offbeat. That's fine.
Absolutely. So I want to start today by talking a little bit about what happened with NVIDIA, because it's certainly very interesting. And I actually had the pleasure of interviewing Kashyap Shuram, who was one of the first people who posted that Twitter thread talking about all the kind of problems that he saw with the balance sheet. So, kind of a very controversial topic, and we have had a lot of the Wall Street insiders came out to kind of defend Nvidia. Now, I will say, since the time this came out, Nvidia has performed pretty badly. I would say even underperformed the broader market, but it hasn't collapsed in the way that you would expect if this was a full blown scandal. So what do you make of this right now? Where do you stand?
Well, first off, I listened to that episode. It was very good. So kudos to you and to him. That was a really great listen. So anyone who's listening to this who hasn't listened to that episode should go listen to it. Um, I have traded Nvidia. I've never really considered myself like an investor in Nvidia, but I
Mm-hmm.
have bought it and held it from the long side in the past. The company has obviously had, it's benefited from a few different narratives. One was it was a huge beneficiary of Ethereum mining when all of the people who wanted to get into Ethereum mining, when it was at like almost 5,000 per coin, you need these GPUs. It's
Mm-hmm.
different than Bitcoin mining because it's a different kind of. You need an ASIC versus a NVIDIA chip, and it's just you can't just switch from one to the other. So you need a very specific kind of chip. So NVIDIA was a huge beneficiary of the boom in ETH mining. Then struggled for a while. The stock did after really with about a year before the merge. Nvidia had kind of peaked and then it started going
Mm-hmm.
back down. Sort of had a pop as like a metaverse play. Like, if you're going to have like VR and metaverse stuff be, the next thing that everyone chases, then you still need these GPUs. And now here we are in 2023, and you need the GPUs for AI, and AI is the thing that's pushing everything higher now, and that's wonderful and great. Look, Nvidia had an amazing quarter in the last quarter, and I have not been short Nvidia directly, and have really just stayed on the sidelines after making a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of money. My pittance as a heretic, while actually riding something to the upside. I kind of got out of Nvidia a little too early, but whatever. That's kind of the way, and just watched it and thought this is getting kind of crazy. And then they had that blowout quarter, And you'll see kind of in this tale of CoreWeave that there is definitely some undertones to the people who are behind that company or who are funding that company are the guys. And I'm not going to name specific names because I don't want to, get blasted or anything. But there was a very good deep dive done on YouTube by a publisher called Nobody Special. And he did
Right.
a lot of research. He did a 3-part
Mhm.
series where he basically went into the history of CoreWeave, and there's financial backing from Magnetar Capital, which are the same guys who are kind of involved in the CDOs during The Big Short. There's actually a
Mhm.
great scene. One of the top scenes in that movie is with Steve Carell's character is talking to the guy at the dinner table, and he's basically kind of got this cavalier attitude of, hey man, I'm just making money, like, like,
Right.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
terrible and I'm betting the other side as
Mhm.
well, but
Yeah.
you know your life just isn't as good as mine, sorry. Like, that was kind of the, so as a viewer of The Big Short, you watch that and you're like, I hate that guy, like, and that's kind of the intention, is you want to
Mhm.
hate that guy. uh,
Right.
but in that same vein is you have these Magnetar Capital guys who are involved in the CDOs back in that era. Well, a lot of these guys are now funding CoreWeave, and CoreWeave is taking that money that is coming in from the Magnetar Capital people and even some of the other larger institutions as well, and they're
Mhm.
basically just buying GPUs from NVIDIA with this money.
Mhm.
Um, and the way that they're getting the money is that the collateral for the loans is the GPUs that they're mining. So it's a very, very suspect way of
Mhm.
doing it. A lot of these guys are linked to Cayman Islands shell companies that are, called, like, investment corp number 50 and stuff like that. Like, it's
Mhm.
there's a lot to it. I'm not probably doing the story justice, but when you look at how CoreWeave, the company, changed from an Ethereum mining company during the last crypto bull wave and has then pivoted to, you know, an
Mhm.
AI type of company buying GPUs from NVIDIA for high performance computing power, you just have this very interesting connection of, people who are, you can make the argument that the guys behind CoreWeave are kind of fueling this NVIDIA rise.
Mhm.
What positions they have on the other side, who knows? But it makes for a very compelling short, in my opinion. And to completely disclose that I do now have exposure to NVIDIA going down through the AXS 1.25 inverse NVIDIA
Right.
ETF. Very
Mhm.
simple trade, not a big position, but I do think that NVIDIA is going to go down, in part because of this CoreWeave situation, but also you've got a lot of insider selling. They've been selling the whole time. There's just a lot of red flags. And at the same time, we could be in or entering a recession. And I just don't know that NVIDIA can keep up all of
Mhm.
these GPU sales for the foreseeable future. So stock's way ahead of itself. It's trading at like 40 times sales or something absurd. So I put on the short through that ETF by going long the
Mhm.
ETF, the inverse ETF, and we'll see. I could be wrong.
Right, absolutely. That's also a trade that obviously I highlighted to my subscribers. And I think also it makes sense, like you say, I also pointed out that, if we are in a situation where we might get a recession or credit event or something like that, and I think Michael Guy had pointed this out, that winners are the first stocks that people cut out, right? So if the stock market does begin to tumble, there is, kind of there is a logic to the idea that Nvidia could even underperform the market. So at the very least, it seems like a reasonable hedge against that kind of downfall in the market
I think
potentially.
so. Yeah, and I actually liked the idea because I had previously put on a short S&P 500 trade through the SPXS, which is the direction inverse, much more risky move. That's a 3x levered one. And it works against you almost
Mm.
on purpose. And so
Right.
you can get kind of wrecked if you don't do that trade right. But I kind of thought about it and I'm like, if I think the broader market is going to go down, and I kind of do, maybe just betting against NVIDIA directly is a better way to express that trade. But anyway, like, I think to the conspiracy theorist point of view, you have then after this CoreWeave story comes out and people are talking about, maybe the situation with NVIDIA isn't as straightforward as meets the
Mhm.
eye. You've got some of the people in the mainstream financial press coming out and really kind of saying, hey, listen, you can't listen to Twitter randos. Like they don't really know what they're
Right.
doing. Trust us, because trusting the experts has worked out so well the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whenever the kind of mainstream media comes out with anything now, it almost just has the opposite effect because people are pretty attuned to what's been going on lately. Um, I will say you pointed out The Big Short, great movie. I love that scene. I will say my favorite scene of that movie is the one in the strip club where where he asks the stripper how many mortgages she has, and I think she has like five
Five.
mortgages.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's another good one. It's a great movie. It's a really good movie.
yeah, so some real good boots on the ground research there.
Absolutely.
Now, I mean, I've been reading a lot into this. There are two sides to the story, of course. There's certain you can make an argument from the non-conspiracy theory, right? I mean, yeah, they were, Ethereum GPU mining company. Why wouldn't they, then go on to rent out NVIDIA GPUs, right? I mean, also, again, that loan against the GPUs, very unprecedented, right? I mean, you'd imagine that traditionally it's been a depreciating asset, but if they are in such
Correct.
demand, then why not? To me, it kind of fits in a little bit. I mean, do you think there's any involvement here by maybe China at some point? That I've heard the idea that maybe CoreWeave is like positioning to get bought out by the Chinese, so this is kind of a way for them to get to the chips.
I don't know. I hadn't really heard that or considered that theory. But when I look at CoreWeave, I don't know. I see a company that doesn't have a huge operational history, and I get really
Mhm.
worried about companies that shift from crypto mining to AI. And we have at least five of them in the public markets through various
Mhm.
crypto mining firms. Some of which I've liked in the past, some of which I'm a little bit more skeptical about now. Um, as it pertains to is China going to buy it, I really couldn't guess there.
Mhm. Yeah, there's certainly a risk there. I mean, everyone's kind of buying from NVIDIA, but no one really wants to. And, we already have some regulations stopping NVIDIA from selling to China. So certainly think there's a risk there. But the broader picture here is, of course, NVIDIA has pretty much been carrying the market. Well, there's been a few other as well, but NVIDIA
Yeah.
especially has been carrying the market. Now, do you think there's any way that this could be something orchestrated? I mean, obviously we have the elections coming up next year. I mean, how much control could, let's say, the powers that be have here? Could this be kind of an orchestrated attempt to keep the market up, pre-election? Is that something that you consider? I mean, how much control could a group of people have on the market?
I mean, I think people can, if they try to manipulate something, they can manipulate something. I mean, we
Mhm.
know that as guys who have been paying attention to the gold market for a while, like, or the
Right.
silver market for a while. You're looked at as a conspiracy theorist or a wacko when you say things like, there are banks or institutional investment firms that are, you know, intentionally putting the thumb on the scale of gold and silver. Well, it turns out that you did have some spoofing and some other things that were not good, that were criminal,
Mhm.
that were happening in those markets. So, you can, if you can execute a strategy, there's an incentive to do it. And I feel like I've seen in the past, do you remember back, and I don't want to make it political, but back when Trump was president,
Mhm.
the running joke on FinTwit on financial Twitter was risk free Friday, right?
Mhm.
Risk free Friday, and it was like, you know, uh, trade optimism. Like trade optimism was another thing. Like trade optimism and risk free Friday were the running meme. And if you
Mhm.
broke out like the returns in the S&P 500 by day of the week, like
Mhm.
3 of the days were negative for a year except Friday, which was like stupid high, like 80% up
Mhm.
on Friday, and
Right.
everything else is down. And it's like, how are they doing this? How are they? And look at Archegos Capital, right? Like, look at how you can gamma squeeze a company like Paramount Global several
Mhm.
multiples higher just by putting on a gamma squeeze trade where you force people to buy the underlying asset. Like, there are ways to manipulate things if you want to. can you do it with $2.3 billion to just, to juice the entire market? I don't know, but if the S&P 500 is largely reliant on 5 to 7 companies, it might not be that difficult.
Right, yeah, of course. I mean, if you think about it, I don't know, because the more the time goes by, the more you can see. I mean, it is a free market, of course, but especially when, like you say, you get into stuff like options and gamma squeezes, there's just so much you can do with a certain amount of money. I think now also sort of concerned with zero DTE options as well, kind of as a potential black swan or something that could really be moving markets. So it's tricky. I mean, I think it makes sense to that extent. Did they crash the market ahead of the elections, and are they propping it up ahead of the next ones? I mean,
Who knows? I mean, um, I guess you just have to dig in on who benefits from what happening, and
mhm,
who do you think is running the show, I guess, is the question that you have to ask. And I think that you might get a different answer depending on who you talk to, because there
mhm,
are some who might think, like, look at, like, like the World Economic Forum, which has put all of these people that have come through their entity, and they've penetrated the cabinets, or whatever Klaus Schwab likes to say. And
mhm,
now they have these World Economic Forum people who are pushing certain initiatives at, you know government bodies and in corporate America, especially. Or the other thing is, maybe they're trying to crash everything to do a CBDC. Like, there are all these different kind of ideas that, it's
mhm,
very easy to go down a rabbit hole. And part of that is probably because social media is such an important part of people's lives at this point. And
mhm,
the algorithms work in a way where, like, you know you can say something that's intentionally ridiculous and it'll go viral, and then can gain a
mhm,
following. And it's tough to say. Like, I'm
mhm.
trying not to be like wishy-washy here, and but I don't know. I don't know who's running the show.
Right, absolutely. It feels like at some point, maybe we should invest less time in, doing valuations and cash flow analysis, and just invest a little bit more time in, all right, what's the next play here? What
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
what
What?
they're gonna try and pull next?
Right.
Uh, I think there's definitely a good argument for what you just mentioned there. I did a video a while ago talking a little bit about the idea that the Federal Reserve to an extent is trying to bankrupt the financial system to obviously promote CBDCs, because I mean, the CBDC, I think, is something that, I think a lot of people would be very against it. You'd need something like a big crisis. You need a justification for it, right? So,
You need people begging for it.
right, exactly. So a situation where you say, well, we need this because otherwise, basically you can have no money. That
Yeah.
kind
Yeah, go ahead.
no, just that kind of makes sense to an extent, I think.
And I've heard, I was kind of in that camp a little bit, that, what could possibly be the reason that, the central bank, which everyone looks to as the Jerome Powell, like the credit master wizard, is coming to the podium to tell us what our capital price is going to be. And, you have this man basically guiding for no increase through like 2024, or at least through 2023, back when stuff was still at zero, back when they were
Mm-hmm.
doing stimulus. And so you have, right or wrong, a lot of banks, a lot of them out in California, uh, you know, making portfolio decisions with their bonds based off the guidance that the rates are going to stay down here. And suddenly they don't stay down there. And not only do they not stay down there, but they go up from a pacing perspective very fast. And you go from 0 to 5 in what, a year, maybe a little more, a little less. And all of a sudden, all this collateral, because of your duration risk mismanagement,
Mm-hmm.
is underwater.
Right.
And it's very odd. It's how you have to either believe that it was intentional, or these guys are just idiots. And
Right.
neither of those are great options.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, to me, a good conspiracy theory always needs to have a good reason behind it, and that is arguably a very good reason, because at the end of the day, you control the money supply. you control everything. I think there was a quote by I think it was one of the presidents, James Garfield, made a quote kind of like that shortly before he was assassinated, of course. uh, in any case, kind of also all related to some of the developments we've had in BRICS, and that's another one, another group of people that often get labeled kind of a bit wacko, what you might call the gold bugs.
The wing nuts, yeah. The
Yeah,
gold.
at least I remember that being the case when I was studying economics and having quite fierce arguments with my macroeconomics teachers. And why are we just using gold? This is ridiculous. And
Yeah,
well, he failed me for that one, but anyway.
that's
So
that's a shame.
I know, right? But anyway, what's happening there? Because we did have the BRICS come out, and kind of they had that BRICS the BRICS
Summit,
summit. And
yeah, BRICS Summit, yeah.
they announced the gold backed currency. I mean, it's kind of been in the works for a while. I don't know. It's hard for me to get a grasp. Maybe it's because I'm searching on Google and I should be on DuckDuckGo. I didn't see a lot of coverage of the actual event. What do you think of all this that's going on there?
Well, I don't think anything too shocking happened.
Mhm.
Look, they're telegraphing what they're doing, whether or not they say it outright or not. I mean, you have an alliance of BRICS nations and other nations that are sympathetic to the BRICS nations, who I believe are very clearly um, tired of the dollar hegemony. And you have uh, entities like China and Russia who have either been slowing their purchase of treasuries or US treasuries, or not purchasing them at all in the case of Russia, and the few that they did have are
Mhm.
gone. um, but now you also, on top of that, have production cuts from Russia and oil. You have production cuts from the Saudis and oil at the same time that the U.S. is supposed to be replenishing the SBR that it sold down
Mhm.
to fight the price at the pump. Um, I don't think these things are a coincidence. I think that,
Right.
especially when you look at China, look, you can say a lot of things about China, but there is a strategic patience, I think, culturally
Mhm.
in China, more so than in the Western world, where they, I think, have a handle on when they have an advantage and when they don't have an advantage. And I think you could argue that you have a lot of manufacturing out there. Look, the economy out there may be slowing, may be in trouble. Who knows? It's difficult to tell with you know data coming from there. But the old adage is, "He who holds the gold makes the rules," and we know that China probably has more gold than they've been telling the world that they have. There's a lot of research that's very good that details
Mhm.
that their actual gold holdings is probably several multiples above where it actually is. So take all these things, put them together. You have an alliance of countries outside of the Western G7 who appear to have mutually beneficial interests that are aligning at the right time. Does that mean that we have a gold backed global reserve currency tomorrow? No. Does it mean that we have
Mhm.
one in 10 years? Maybe not. Does it mean we have one in 50 years? I think that's probably a pretty good bet.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, like you say, at the end of the day, these countries are all coming together. But the only way they can really do that is by issuing a gold-backed currency, because there's obviously not going to be they're not all going to start using the yuan, are they? I mean, that would be pretty crazy. I don't know
Right.
if this is kind of anecdotal, but I'm here in Mexico, and I don't know if this is true, but my girlfriend told me that apparently if you have dollars here and you go to the airport, they'll actually like sorry, if you have pesos and you go to the airport and you want some dollars, they'll actually give you dollars at a very favorable rate.
Hmm.
Like they're trying to get rid of their dollars, which is kind of interesting. Also, the Mexican peso, unfortunately, has been doing very well over the last couple of years for some reason. So they're doing quite well.
I
But
hadn't heard that, but I think where if you're a sovereign nation and you don't have a lot of, I don't know about Mexico's position, to be perfectly
Mhm.
honest. But if you don't have a large exposure to uh, dollar denominated debt obligations, and you have
Mhm.
excess dollars in reserves, then and you want to offload them, then yeah, I mean, that'd be one way that you could do it.
Right. But actually, the dollar in general has been doing pretty well. I mean, I don't know how much you subscribe to. I guess you've heard maybe of like the dollar milkshake
Oh
theory.
yes, Brent Johnson's dollar milkshake. I know it
So
very well.
is that something you'd subscribe to then?
I think that what he is arguing makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it also is difficult to assess which inning of that are we in. Like, are
Right.
we in the second inning of that, or are we in the eighth inning of that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I think a lot of people expect some sort of default from the US because math is undefeated. You can't keep borrowing to pay a previous borrower forever. Like you eventually run out of greater fools. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, if whether that default comes overtly through, sorry, we're done, can't pay you, or through just light the printing press up, we're just going for it,
Mm-hmm.
whichever you pick, I mean, it doesn't end well for US dollar holders. And,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a US dollar debt outstanding, like I do for my mortgage, and you expect that the dollar is going to decline in purchasing power, then that works out for you, I guess. Right.
Right. So that's the trade, isn't it? So you want to kind of lever up.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, here's another question though. So you talk about China storing a lot of gold. How much Bitcoin is China storing? Any at all?
I think they probably have some. I think they probably have some because look at what China did with gold, right? Because China initially banned gold. They told their many years ago they told their citizens not to buy gold.
Right.
Why would they do that? And if we actually believe that they have more gold than they say they do, then
Mhm.
they're telling their citizens not to buy gold because they don't want them bidding against them. And
Mhm.
so, again, conspiracy theories are on for this episode. Tinfoil hat. That was my, for people who aren't listening, I just put my tinfoil hat on. Or people who are not watching, excuse me. But no, like if you watch what China just did with gold and you believe that they have more than they say they do, they might
Mhm.
be doing the exact same thing with Bitcoin again, right? Like, don't
Mhm.
buy it, get it out of here. We don't want it. Oh, by the way, we have a ton of it.
Mhm. Right. Here's my question though, because if the idea, because China has also been pushing the CBDC, right? I mean, and the idea, obviously, a lot of people have is, China, let's say, pretty centralized government, obviously
Mm-hmm.
likes having control over its people,
Yeah.
but a gold-backed currency kind of takes that away. How do those add up?
So
Is there a possibility that you could have like the gold-backed currency and a different currency,
I
you know,
think you can, because
domestically?
if you're keeping, so for China, from their advantage, you would keep the CBDC for control
Mhm.
over the populace. You want something with gold for a seat at the global table, right?
Mhm.
Like if you are just printing money the way the US is doing and you don't really have any backing, your seat at the table might not look that great. Your hand might not look
Mhm.
that good at the poker table. But if you have control over your populace with your native currency, even if it's only used in your country, as long as you have gold and another currency that is backed by gold, you have the ability to have a seat at the table when it comes to trade and things.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But the question is, I mean, obviously, the US isn't just going to take this lying down. And a lot of people often do say, well, what's the dollar backed by? And they say, well, it's backed by the US military. So, I mean, how does this end? Because at
that
some point,
that's a popular answer, but that's actually not true. It's backed by faith.
right.
It's backed by
Well,
faith and
but
nothing more.
also the US military a little bit, and at least their control over the Middle East and
That was true
petrodollar.
up until more recently, I think.
Right, of
Up
course.
until
Right.
more recently, because now you have now we've gone over the last 24 months, we've gone from former Fed chair and current US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen saying the dollar will be the global reserve currency for the rest of our lifetimes to the dollar will lose global reserve currency status, but it's going to be slow. So
Mhm.
if they're actually saying that now, the dollar will lose global reserve status. I think we all agree on that. And if they're
Mhm.
saying, yeah, it's going to happen, but it's going to be slow, it's probably not going to be that slow. It might be slow, but not that slow.
Right.
So I think that might answer your question, but maybe to elaborate on it a little bit, you know, you have instances in the past, and I'm not going to say them specifically, but you have instances of the past where other countries that have challenged the dollar as a global payment mechanism and wanted to do something else, something with gold specifically, sometimes those leaders end up dead. And now we have what's very obvious with the BRICS, the
Mhm.
possibility that this global gold thing might be a little bit closer, but China, we're not going into China. We're not going into, well, we have a proxy war with Russia.
Mhm.
um, but you know, the US can't fight everybody. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And so
Mhm.
especially when there's no SPR, when there's no SPR, you can't fight everybody. So
Mhm.
it's backed by faith. It has been backed by faith in the military in the past, but clock's ticking.
Right. Like you say, exactly. Clock's ticking. It's like you say, we don't know what inning we're in there. But I did hear an interesting analogy once, someone talking about this. They said, well, it's a little bit like being in a car, and you say, well, I'm probably not going to have a car accident, but that doesn't mean you don't put a seatbelt on, right? So, I mean, there's obviously something happening, and it's definitely important to investors to perceive. I mean, whether, like you say, it's in our lifetime, probably, whether it's in the next 10 years. Like, the timeline probabilities of a shorter timeline are at least increasing, and we're seeing some weird stuff. We saw that weird spike in the 2-year Treasury bills the other day, or notes rather. What happened there? What do you make of that?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I woke up, I looked at it and saw this massive, absolutely ridiculous, wick in
Mhm.
the 2-year note because I pay attention to the 2-year, and I'm just like, what the hell was that? Uh, Other people raise concerns because the first thing I did when I saw that was immediately go to Twitter because I'm
Right.
a Twitter rando and I like other Twitter randos. So I'm like, how do I get my news? Twitter. Um, so I go to Twitter and I just type in 2-year note, and then I see all these other people talking about it as well. And turns out we're told it's a glitch.
Mhm.
Maybe. I don't know. Um, it all feels very September 2019 to me, though. Like with do you remember what happened back then with the yields from I can't remember.
What was it? The reverse repo.
Yes, thank you. The reverse
Right.
repo. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It seems,
Yeah.
it just kind of feels like that. Like there's this
Mm.
weird thing that happens and people are like, what the hell is that? And nothing to see here, though.
Right. So the only difference is that now the Democrats are in power, so there's maybe they're gonna sweep it under the rug a few more months at
Who
least.
knows? Who knows? Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, you know, I've kind of had the view that it's just really a duopoly like system that
Mhm.
is, when you may get the occasional outlier with someone like Trump, but like candidate Trump was very different from President Trump. So, candidate Trump in one of the debates was talking about the Federal Reserve and how they were, manipulating markets and things like that. And I'm watching this and I'm like, holy moly, I can't believe he's saying this stuff.
Mhm.
And then he wins, and then he's trying to get Jerome Powell to cut rates. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, he got to, or it
Right.
was just BS, the whole time. Who knows? But um, I look at it like, unless you have like a real outsider, um, all I think just it's kind of all the same. Like these guys are going to dinner together. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like
Mhm.
the thing in Washington is they show up, they stay there as long as they possibly can. They all come out millionaires. They solve no actual problems, and they're hanging out together in the Hamptons or whatever.
Mhm. Oh yeah, of course. It's all a group of insiders, and you have to wonder. I mean, yeah, even if Trump had good intentions, how much could he have done? And also, but also, did he even have good intentions? Like,
We'll
Either
never know.
way,
Yeah.
it's like you said before. They're either stupid or they don't want to help. Either way, the outcome isn't great.
Right. Well, I mean, like, and not to just, pick on Trump, because I totally empathize with why he won. Um, but then like you go on the right or the left, excuse me, and you have like, someone like Elizabeth Warren who has made her notoriety by being like the anti-bank, uh, the anti-bank congressperson, or whatever she is, senator. I'm very, very knowledgeable about all this stuff. You can tell. Um, but she makes her base by feeding them this anti-bank Ritalin, and then the first opportunity there is for real innovation of the banks that's organic and outside of their control, and she's putting together an anti-crypto army. Like,
Mhm.
tell me you're full of shit without telling me you're full of shit. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And just to be clear, if you did know a lot about politics, I think to me that also makes me lose respect for someone. The more you know about these things, I think at this point it's almost a waste of time. I think it's like you
Well,
say, what's the
yeah,
point of knowing what a candidate stands for when they don't really stand for that, right?
it's one of the things that's been so frustrating. Late 20s and early 30s. I'm in my mid 30s now, but just really seeing
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective how neither side really has any motivation to actually do anything. And the reason is because the re-election percentage for Congress is like 90%. like, like there's no incentive whatsoever to actually do anything because everyone keeps voting for them. Like all the same people. How is Maxine Waters at 85, or Nancy Pelosi at 85 or 86, or Mitch McConnell at the same age? How are these people still in office? Like, it's mind-boggling. And so when you see that, you just kind of lose really faith in the whole system, and it can be a dark place if you don't find joy in your life.
Absolutely. I think a lot of these politicians should certainly retire and maybe pursue trading and investing full time because they are
They're
pretty good.
very good at that. Yeah, I mean, and that goes far back to like Hillary Clinton, like one of the greatest cattle future traders of all time.
Out of future trading.
Oh
How did
yeah, look it up. Look it
I,
up.
I didn't know that one.
Oh, you'll love it. Check it out. Hillary Clinton's cattle future trading.
I'll look it up. Anyway, since we're talking about politics, this is an interesting one, and I haven't I don't know too much about this person, but I've been reading a few things. I have here a headline. It's from the New York Times. Far-right libertarian wins Argentina's presidential primary. This is, of course, Javier Milei, who has been on the record saying, he wants to abolish the central bank. Apparently, which you might say is good. Apparently, he also wants to use the US dollar in Argentina. Maybe not so good, but I don't know if you've heard anything about this guy because he's had some interesting interviews.
He's the guy with like the mutton chops, right? Like the like
Right? Yeah.
yeah. From what I understand, he's a Bitcoin guy too. So I'm surprised that he wants to use the dollar. If you understand Bitcoin, um, you know, it's odd picking the dollar then for your
Right.
currency.
I'm not sure. I'm just reading the headline. I mean, what I remember him most from is, there was a clip where he was basically talking kind of about Bitcoin and, basically just explaining central banking and how it's all a scam.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, like you know, all we know in our life, I guess, in our brief time on this rock, is that the purchasing power of the currency that we're told we have to use always goes down. And
Mhm.
why is that? It's because you could make a lot of arguments that it's Congress's fault because they have allowed a central bank to always monetize the budget deficit. Or you could argue that it's by design and that this has all been, a scam from the jump.
Mhm.
And again, it's like neither are good. So are good scenarios. Like,
Mhm.
which is it? Are they doing it on purpose or are they just dumb? Like,
Right. Yeah, I tend to think the more nefarious. I mean, there's obviously a lot of reasons why a government would just want to monetize the deficit, and obviously it's a hidden tax on everyone, right? And it's a lot easier to do that than to actually raise taxes.
And I
But
think that we see this historically with global reserve currencies. It's like the Triffin's dilemma. It's always kind of doomed to fail, because if you're going to be kind of like the settlement layer, you've got to kind of always be putting currency out. And, that just doesn't have a sustainable outcome. You know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah, makes me think though. So, for example, now you have this Milei guy coming into Argentina trying to fix things. Can things be fixed in the US? I mean, is there a combination of people and policies and ideas that could change the course here? Is there a way out?
It's a tough one because, I think that the optimist would say, look, if we stop doing the things that are obviously really bad and we just cut that out right now, like have not, borrowing to pay past debts, bad. If we stop doing all that and we cut a lot of spending and we get to a point where we can try to grow ourselves out of this, then the question is, do we have the demographics that allow us to do that? And I'm not
Mhm,
sure that we do, because you've got birth rates that have been declining for a very long time.
mhm,
Um, look at, like, when you look at metrics like housing affordability, um, it's very difficult, even though the actual rate to borrow isn't, it's not higher than it was when the boomers started getting into home buying. It was much higher then, because, the Fed was
mhm,
still trying to fight inflation at that point. Um, Even though the rate is lower, the home price is so much higher that the aggregate cost is much, much higher. And then when you put that against what people actually are earning, in real
mhm.
terms, it's
Right.
just, uh, it's not fun. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm watching my sister, who's in her mid 30s, like I am, buying a house that is the most expensive. This specific, it's a, very old house, but it's the most expensive it's ever been, even though it needs tons of updates. And she can't get this thing unless she goes above list, because that's what the market is dictating at this point. And then on top of
Mhm,
that, the borrow rate is stupid high compared to the last 15 years. It's a trick. It's really tough. So, she gets into that house. Now that spending has to come from somewhere, doesn't it? And so if you have millennials who are struggling to get into homes, and if they are fortunate enough to be able to get into homes, but that money that is servicing the debt is coming from, going out to
mhm,
eat or going out to movies or restaurants or fun things. That's not good for the economy. It's not good for tax receipts. There's just,
mhm.
it's difficult for me to see this ending well, without some sort of jubilee where it starts over. And this is not an idea that I think is great. It's probably the least bad option. Someone like Roy Sabag, who's the CEO of Gold Money, has thrown this idea out there, and shown that in the past, people end up starting over, and for the most part, they're kind of happy, like, because this overhang is gone. Look, a
Mhm.
lot of people get wiped out in that situation, and that's the negative part.
Mhm.
It's like it's a long-winded way of saying I don't know that we can really get out of this. I think it may be beyond saving. I think the time to fix this was probably 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting since you brought up the demographics, because kind of another conspiracy theory there, which is of course the US, they can rely if they relied on immigration, hypothetically you can keep the demographics up. So one of the theories I've heard is that is of course why we have a big incentive to keep other countries like Africa impoverished, because kind of relying on that immigration from all those poorer countries to kind of sustain that demographic, what would otherwise be a demographic collapse, I
It's
guess.
a it's an interesting theory,
Mhm,
and it is interesting seeing what has happened between like Texas and New York, where they're kind of bussing people up, and because New York is a sanctuary city, and so Texas is saying, hey, like, they're all coming over the border, we can't do this, you're up saying, well, we should take them. You can take some of these
Mhm.
people and help them out. And then you got Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, who's like, whoa, this is a problem, doesn't really work out. But because that's the other thing, like, US infrastructure isn't that great. And I live in the Rust Belt, which is, I'm in Ohio specifically, but when I go over the border to Michigan, I mean, like, the roads are bad, they're real bad. And
Mhm.
you've got bridges that need a lot of work everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of problems. And so whether they're trying to, bring people from other countries on purpose or whatever, I mean, there are just so many problems. That's all I can say.
Yeah, but like you say, it's hard to see a way out. I've I was reading or rereading a Ray Dalio's book the other day, The Changing World Order, and he has that list of he has like a table where he explains within the last 150 years, like at least 20 different events in different countries where equity values have been completely wiped out, or just like people have lost almost 90% of of what they had, and I mean we've had a pretty good period of unprecedented period of peace, really, and kind of stability, but historically that's kind of not really normal, right? It's rare, so.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it seems similar almost to what like Neil Howe has said with like the fourth turning.
Mhm.
His theory of there's kind of like four 20 to 25-year phases, and the fourth phase is the fourth turning, and it usually ends with like calamity. Like there's some sort of big problem that
Mhm.
turns you know uh violent. And we haven't had that in a while, and
Mhm.
could be due. So I don't know.
So it's all about timing, though, isn't it? And that's kind of a little why I like to call myself a bit of a pragmatic investor, because I try and split the difference. Because at the end of the day, you can't just be Peter Schiff and say that the world's going to end for the last 20 years. I mean that hasn't worked out too well. So
That's the thing. Yeah, I mean, timing is everything. Eventually
exactly.
Peter will be right.
Right. Yeah. Maybe in our lifetime, hopefully.
I mean, the
Or
sun's gonna explode at some point, right? Like, not for a long time though.
yes, and gold will be very valuable then, won't it?
Maybe not though, because from what I understand, we're going to be getting on rocket ships and flying up to asteroids and mining gold on asteroids. And this is the reason why gold isn't going to go up in value, because we're just going to go to outer space and mine it from asteroids. I don't know what the break even price would have to be to make that viable, but whatever.
I don't know. I'm skeptical. I mean, I'm already skeptical about the moon landing since we're on conspiracy theories. I've got to be kind of skeptical on this whole asteroid business. I'm not even sure they can get it up there.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I know we've probably covered this. This is our, I think, third, fourth time doing
Hmm.
this, and we've talked a lot about this, but it bears repeating. So let's kind of put this into actionable investment advice. Let's say, I mean, you have kind of the demise of the US to an extent happening at some point. Timeline kind of getting closer and closer, but at the same time, you don't want to be Peter Schiff. So
Yeah,
how do you play this then? What's in your view the good way to maybe hedge against these things, or at the same time maybe just keep a balanced portfolio, just not even make money, right? I think the challenge seems to be here. How do you just preserve your wealth, right?
totally. I think that, and it really depends on what age you are, where you
Mhm.
are in life. I believe that 60/40 is probably the wrong approach at this point. I think if you're young and you're trying to really build wealth, then unfortunately, what the scenario is, you're probably pretty far out on the risk curve, which means you're looking at things like crypto and altcoins and things like that. Um, but even in that regard, I would never advocate for putting a significant percentage of any portfolio into high risk stuff. For example, I think the dollar has problems. I think bonds are problematic. I still have bonds, right? Like, I'm still in money markets in some of my accounts. I think that if you're going to be in equities, you want to be in equities that are paying a dividend and that have some degree of safety from a standpoint of, can we keep selling products if the world is in a tough spot?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's probably a terrible sector to be in, but even something like consumer discretionary, you're going to be able to find some companies that are trading at decent multiples, and that may actually benefit from a slowdown. For example, I like certain names that are in the aftermarket car parts space, and not
Mm-hmm.
even not even like the AutoZones or the O'Reillys of the world. I think that there are other options that have pretty low multiples. Um, I like that. I like, some sin stocks, unfortunately, do usually do okay, because the underlying product that they're selling does pretty good too. So,
Sorry, what
uh,
did you say? What stocks?
sin stocks, like, exposure to gambling, exposure to
Okay.
tobacco, alcohol,
Good stuff.
people that are down on their luck are buying scratch offs and drinking beer, cheap beer. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, so if you believe that we're headed in a direction where, things aren't that great for a lot of people and people are borrowing to spend,
Mm-hmm.
trading down, I think trading down is something to keep an eye on. I think people are going to be looking at cost cutting in their household budgets, and so you want to look at, but at the same time they still have to live. They still have to be able to do stuff or they're going to lose their minds. So, cost cutting, trading down, areas where people are going to be trying to fix an old car instead of buy a new one. Other areas, obviously, I like the metals.
Mm-hmm.
If you're young but you're still not, if you're like not into the crypto thing and you think it's all kind of a scam, I understand. Then look at gold miners, because there you get uh, a sort of similar uh, thesis, anti-dollar type thing, but you have the leverage of the Bitcoin miner or the altcoins through gold miners or silver miners instead.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some names in that space that I like. Um, but if you want to look at, again, like, you want to look at those names that have low multiples, that pay a
Mm-hmm. Right.
dividend, that aren't overvalued. Um, and then obviously, like, you want to have real physical metal.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have self storage. You want to have crypto off of an exchange. um Bitcoin, even things like Litecoin. I know that Litecoin, people hate Litecoin. I don't. I think Litecoin's fine.
Mm-hmm.
um I actually recently started buying Solana again. um
Same here,
yeah,
yeah.
I it's an interesting setup there. And so stuff like that, stuff that's just beaten down, people hate it.
Mm-hmm.
Beaten down,
Right.
people hate it. What
Mm-hmm.
what else? And then, like, look, also, you should always have cash for an emergency. You should always have uh some element of food storage,
Mm-hmm.
shelf stable. um you know Invest in your education, but not, I don't mean like go to a university. I mean, like, watch people teach you how to do things on YouTube, whether
Just
it's,
watch this podcast.
yeah, like, and like, try to grow food. Like,
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
sounds so simple, but they, even if you're in an urban area, like, you have the ability to put something in front of a window and have vertical growth. Like, do it,
Mm-hmm.
grow something, start small, learn it, and invest in your ability and in your resiliency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe buy some beans and bullets too, I guess.
Gold, guns, and garden seeds. Yep.
It's interesting. There's definitely a lot of big movement now. I think they call it, what is it, homesteading, or that kind of a idea of being self-sufficient. And hey,
Oh yeah.
if you also
Like,
get to avoid all the GMOs and all that good stuff, then
I have a friend who just told me within the last couple of weeks that he's trying to buy a bigger property, a few acres, and he's going to start doing some growing out there. And I'm like, wow, all right,
right.
it's good to have friends like that.
And now you've got those little tiny nuclear reactors that you can just put in your backyard and you're set for life, or at least a couple hundred years, I think.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's definitely a challenging environment. I've recently kind of launched what I like to call the end of the world portfolio.
Love it.
Yeah, I'm basically kind of trying to focus on this idea of what is left, when the world is ended, what can be a decent allocation, without just being the guy who says, okay, just buy gold or whatever, these try and look for something. I've been looking at a lot of kind of alternative assets, so
Mm-hmm.
stuff like whiskey, wine.
Sure.
I saw you did an article recently about what was it? It was something with crypto where you get to buy it's like buying royalties of someone's social media, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of the interesting things too about the crypto area. You have some NFTs that you could buy like cash flow in an
Mhm.
artist or in a business. Are those unregistered securities? Probably. Yeah, probably. Um, but like Royal.io is a music artist
Mhm.
led NFT project where
Mhm.
they were basically selling um, they were selling NFT versions of their songs, and
Mhm.
holders of those NFTs were entitled to royalties from streaming rights. Um, very cool idea. It's innovative. It solves a problem in the music space where a lot of independent creators can't make a living doing music because of the way that system is set up. Um, Things like that are very interesting about really public blockchain specifically, not so much
Mhm.
crypto. But one of them specifically was Stoner Cats. And Stoner Cats, I wrote a little bit about it. Stoner Cats essentially did a fundraise through NFTs and token gated the product. They basically raised a bunch of 8 million, I think they raised through selling NFTs. And then because the NFTs are on chain, they were able to token gate the viewing of the videos that they made through that funding. So it's a very interesting idea. And I've actually seen other projects like this in the past, one of which was built on Solana. Um, but you have the powers that be kind of fighting this. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Where you could say that Stoner Cats is an unregistered security because it was a crowd funded product.
Mhm.
Um, you could also arguably say the same thing about like baseball cards or other, collectibles that have a secondary market where people can sell them and make money off of something that's not really designed to be something that appreciates from a capital standpoint, right? Um, so look, there are certainly opportunities in the alternative space. Like you, I like rare wine. Whiskey, I think, is fine. I have like a Vino Vest account,
Mhm. Yeah,
uh,
it's in the process of
which
that
is
actually.
yeah, which is wine. So I have some wine
Mhm.
exposure, and I could actually take delivery of that wine and drink it if I wanted to.
Mm.
Which I'm
So,
thinking about. No, but
always nice when you're down on your luck and
you're right.
going to the casino too
Yeah,
much.
yeah. I don't have any money. Give me the wine that I have. No,
Uh,
but like wine, people
mhm.
have invested in things like sneakers.
Mhm.
There, it's kind of like the tokenization, so to speak, of everything.
Right.
Everything kind of is becoming a.
Mhm.
This is the type of stuff that you see when your currency is collapsing. A pair of sneakers that
Absolutely.
you bought 10 years
Right.
ago is suddenly worth twice
Mhm.
that.
Absolutely. And to me, I think that it's also something that you know, they're fighting so hard against. And if you think about it, it's kind of almost an area of investment that has been very warded off from retail, kind of a Wall Street secret, right? I mean, they get into like all these, yeah, they can buy wine and fine art. I mean, obviously with the art, there's an element of money laundering, perhaps. I know that Hunter Biden, for example, has sold a couple of pieces in the past.
Good for him.
Yeah. But also even other forms of maybe alternative investments like private equity or certain things that I think definitely thanks to like say blockchain and tokenization, it's something that can really kind of you know hopefully get into the hands of retail. I hope.
The blockchain really disrupts the accredited investor system,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when you only allow for certain people of a certain wealth or a certain income level to speculate in a certain market, you're really doing a disservice to the actual market mechanism. And an example that I can give is um, I wanted to, many years ago, do an investment in something that I couldn't because I wasn't an accredited investor. But a doctor who lived down the street from me, who may not know nearly as much about this actual underlying business,
Mm-hmm.
could invest in it because he or she makes more money. There's a problem with that, in that you're under the guise of protecting the retail investor who may actually be able to put together a thoughtful thesis on why something is a good idea, but you're not letting them do it because of some arbitrary wealth figure that they haven't yet attained. You're limiting their ability to actually get to that point. And this is partially why I think we've seen the wealth disparity continue. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have I think it's like the 1% owns like 30 to 40 per 25 to 30% of all the equity, and it used to be like half that like 20 years ago. Like, I mean, that says it all.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's written in the Bible, I think. So there's a quote there that says, "To those that have, more will be given," and certainly it seems to be that way.
Yeah, I mean, it there are a lot of things that need to be disrupted, and frankly the public blockchain that's permissionless does a lot of it. And not to be like the Bitcoin fixes this guy, but like, you know, the idea of a public permissionless distributed ledger, it does do a lot of good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Mike, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Where can we send people on the internet to find you?
Well, I write on Seeking Alpha fairly regularly. I'd say I probably get like 3 or 4 articles up there every week. And I also do a lot of my more conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat type stuff on my Substack. You could search for it. It's Heretic Speculator. The actual URL is faybomb, faybomb.substack.com. And I would say that I probably get 2 to 3 articles up there every week too. So I stay pretty busy analyzing, writing, and then pontificating, uh, you know, in my pajamas. So it's fun.
Well, I can personally say I thoroughly enjoy the stuff you put out on Substack. I also enjoy a good conspiracy theory, and I just like how you always, there's definitely always a voice behind your articles. When you start an article, I'm always like, okay, this is Mike speaking to me, and I can really tell, and it's really good work. So to anyone on the fence, please go ahead and check it out. You won't be disappointed.
I really
Okay.
appreciate that. And all I can say is that, you know, I can't promise that readers are going to like everything I say, but
Mhm.
I will swear that I am being authentic.
Absolutely. Anyway, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thanks again, Mike, and let's do this again. Hopefully before the dollar collapses.
You bet. Thanks again for
All right.
having me.
All right. Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Pragmatic Investor. If you're still around, I take it you enjoy the content. So please consider liking and following me on YouTube. And if you haven't already, also, I recommend you check me out on Substack, jamesfordsubstack.com, where I do a free weekly newsletter and a lot of in-depth content on macro, alternative assets, and a lot more. And you can also check me out on Seeking Alpha, the Pragmatic Investor.